So today we're going to be talking about chapter 6, going to be doing my review on it. This one was emotional damage, huge paralleling stories, a lot of stuff happened in this one, so let's go ahead and break it down. So first and foremost, huge foreshadowing at the very beginning. I was super excited whenever I first started this one because seemingly, spoiler alert here, Frost Nova was on her last leg and it looked like we defeated her. It looks like she was going to join Rhodes Island. I was like, yes, we're actually going to be able to do this by the end of the chapter. And boy, was I in for the biggest twist, and the way that it actually turns out, it was super heartbreaking. But before we jump into that, I want to talk about kind of the first arcing story, which is a continuation of chapter 5, learning more about Faust and Mephisto. So I was really interested to see how they were going to do the different things with them. And I thought I was actually going to have to check out a different storyline, but chapter 6 definitely delivered on how that story kind of works and how the parallels between the two kids actually came to be. At first, I thought Faust was just kind of being there because he respected Mephisto power wise and was kind of held into it. But it turns out that they had a super strong bond at the very beginning when they met, and they actually had entirely different names, and they had real names and all this different stuff, and they renamed themselves for the purpose of this bond and what they set out to do. And even though Faust did seem a little bit on the fence of the way that Mephisto was kind of going, you can see early on that Mephisto is starting to get this warped sense of justice. He's becoming a little bit more of an insane kid and stuff like that. Faust was like, hey, I gotta help this dude, I really care about him. And you can actually see that connection going forward. And it wasn't just Faust being bullied into it. They actually had a deepened connection and thought that they were doing kind of the right thing. Now they talk a little bit about Tallulah. I think that's going to be a little bit more chapter 7-ish, but it seems like she's not exactly playing her cards the way everybody thinks she is as well. And she plays a bigger part in everything. But talking about the kids, it really seemed like, hey, this is what's going on with them. And even though you can kind of understand why Mephisto kind of went into the way that he did, it still doesn't really make me forgive him for all the different ways that he did it and the way that he thought he was doing it, especially turning his soldiers into like these zombies that are just suffering continuously, even though he thought that, he was essentially doing the right thing. Turns out he's still a pretty messed up kid. So going into more spoiler territory on Faust, he does end up taking the bullet there. He ends up dying. He doesn't have much will to live. Honestly, it seemed like towards the end there, he was just kind of like, hey, I'm just doing this to save Mephisto. Mephisto, get the hell out of here. And it just devastates Mephisto when he finds out that Faust is dead. And it looks like Mephisto died internally. He just is an empty shell, doesn't care about anything, slumped over. And everybody's questioning, is he dead? What happened to him? And he's just kind of a slumped shell. From what I understood, though, we don't necessarily know exactly what happens to Mephisto. It seems like they just kind of carried him off. And they're like, hey, I guess we're going to get this kid out of here because that's what Faust wanted. Now, I had a lot of respect for the way that Faust did it because he was really trying to, towards the end anyway, he was trying to get everybody kind of together, his group, his squadron, and he was really trying to protect as many people as he could, including Mephisto, even though at that time they kind of have different opinions on the way that things should have happened. But I do got to respect the guy for just being like, you know what? This is it. I'm going to go out with a bang, and then I'm just going to be able to get everybody out seemingly the way that he wanted to. Now, that was a huge kind of story that I didn't necessarily think was going to happen right away. But then we get into Frost Nova stuff, and we actually have some previews from what different things happened on some of the earlier chapters when Doctor and Frost Nova were seemingly in the pit together and kind of talking and conversing and seeing what was going on with there. They seem to have some sort of level of respect and mutual respect and starting to get a little bit closer very early on. It seems like at first they're kind of strangers. They're kind of going through the motions. You're talking to them and you're actually getting a story of what Frost Nova was going through and kind of how she became to be. And then she actually made a very interesting bet at the end where it's like, hey, if my people get me out first, I'll kill you. If your people get me out first, I'll kill you. And then I was like, oh, that doesn't seem to be a very good beneficial kind of thing. And then it ends up that they both get out and stuff like that. But that is a good foreshadowing into the next kind of part, which is a very sad issue where we kind of meet back up with Frost Nova after getting the warning like, hey, next time we meet up, we will be enemies and we'll end up having to kill each other. We end up having to meet up with her again and ultimately, unfortunately, having to end her life, which is why I got so sad, because it was like I thought she was going to be kind of going with us. She's like, I'll join Rhodes Island, but it was more sentimental. It was more out of like, hey, I'm going to be with you spiritually. I understand your vision now, and I totally understand what you're kind of doing moving forward. And it's not more of like a physical thing where she's actually helping. She's more or less like, hey, I understand what you're doing, and I represent that now in my last final breaths. It's just kind of a really sad story. And I actually got pretty teary-eyed for the first time in a very long time on story stuff. I don't get that emotionally attached, but just the kind of the arc and the way that they actually built up Frost Nova was almost perfect. You almost kind of like understand what she's going through. The Yeti squad is also a bunch of bros, so it's kind of hard to hate them. And then you get just like kind of an idea what her backstory is, what's going on with her, why she's here and doing what she's doing. And you understand that her vision is kind of in line with what Rhodes Island's doing. They're trying to protect infected. They're trying to do what they think is best for the good of the people and trying to mutually just get everybody together, whether they're infected or not, and trying to live in harmony. It's just kind of a different side of that. The reunion's kind of taking some different motions, but Frost Nova ultimately has her goals in line with the way that Rhodes Island is, which is, I think, why at the very ending, they kind of gave the blessing spiritually, like, hey, I understand what you guys are doing. You defeated me here. Go save whoever you can, however you can. I'm going to be here spiritually. But just hearing that and hearing the fact that at the very end, she's like, I'll join Rhodes Island before taking her last breath, was just heart-wrenching. Like, it was just like, oh, I wish you could stay. I wish you could come with us. I wish you could be a part of the team. But unfortunately, that is where she ends. And that is kind of where the story ends. I got to say, this is one of my favorite chapters so far. It gave a lot of detail and a lot of story. We actually seen a lot of different arcs. We got to see a little bit more about Blaze and the way that she's kind of going through things. And then it gets a little bit deeper with the enemies. Like, we don't really know what's going on with them. Do they have similar goals as us? Do they really think that what they're doing is in the best interest? Will Rhodes Island ever end up being kind of the same thing? Because it seemingly thinks that they're kind of fighting in the same vein, but one side isn't necessarily good and one isn't necessarily evil, which is what I think is really cool about this, is because it gives you a glimpse of the real world. Sometimes we have different sides that are considered good and evil, but that's not always necessarily the case. And sometimes they're fighting for the same purpose or the same end goal, but they don't necessarily meet eye to eye on the ways that everything should happen and the way that that should go about. I think that was very pronounced in chapter 6. So I'm really excited to see where chapter 7 goes and what happens with that. But anyway, that is my full rundown of kind of chapter 6 and what I thought about it. I'm gonna go ahead and leave it there. Have a good rest of your night, guys. Peace.